11 minutes. That's how long I sat across from it before I understood that everything I thought I knew about the world was wrong. Not metaphorically, not my perspective shifted. I mean the actual, physical, mechanical reality of how the universe operates. The rules, the constants, the things you take for granted when you wake up in the morning and trust that gravity still works and the sun is still a star and death is still the end. And what it said. I'm not being dramatic here, I'm being clinical. What it said made me set my pen down, close my notebook, and sit in silence for so long that the guards almost pulled me out because they thought I'd had a stroke. I hadn't had a stroke. I'd had something worse. I'd had an answer. But I'm going to tell this story the right way, from the beginning. Because if I jump to the interview first, you're going to think I'm insane, and honestly, that's fair. I questioned my own sanity for about 3 weeks afterward. You need context. You need to understand where I was, who sent me there, and exactly how many locked doors and armed guards and layers of reinforced concrete stood between that thing and the outside world before you can fully appreciate what it means that none of it was enough. That it was sitting in that room because it wanted to. And it had been waiting. For a very, very long time. My name is Dr. Joel Martin. I'm a criminal psychologist. Or I was. I don't know what I am now. A witness, maybe. A warning. Possibly a mistake. And this is the story of Pinnacle Station, and the thing they keep on level 6 that doesn't have a name. If you're smart, you'll stop listening right now. Go watch something else. Something safe. Because once you hear what I heard, once you know what I know, you can't unknow it. Trust me. I've tried. I'll start with what I can tell you, which isn't much. Because the people I work for have lawyers whose entire job description is making sure people like me don't tell people like you things like this. But here we are. So let's see how far I get before someone knocks on my door. Somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, and I mean deep, the kind of deep where your cell signal died 2 hours ago and the trees are so thick the GPS just gives up and says, good luck. There is a facility that the United States government has operated since 1958. On paper, it's a geological survey station. It has a real name. I'm not going to use it. During my onboarding, a woman in a grey suit sat me down and described, in detail, what would happen if I disclosed the facility's identity in any public context. She used phrases like permanent disappearance from public record and legal status reclassification. And she said them with the calm warmth of someone ordering a sandwich. Very motivating. I have never been more motivated in my life. So I'll call it Pinnacle Station. From the outside, metal prefab buildings and a geological survey sign to keep people away. Underneath, a 7-level complex cut straight into the bedrock. It's a prison. And the inmates aren't human. I know the face you're making. I made the same face you're making. That face that says, okay, this is where the crazy starts. But when you go down there and see a 7-foot-tall thing with an impossible skull reading a paperback novel in a glass cell, your skepticism evaporates instantly. Pinnacle holds 187 entities, divided into 5 tiers. Tier 1, nuisances, things that are weird but won't kill you, probably. Tier 2, dangerous to individuals, things that will kill you, specifically you, one person at a time. Tier 3, dangerous to communities. They can wipe a small town off the map in a weekend if left unchecked. Tier 4, threats to civilization. They'd require a military response, and we might still lose. And Tier 5 doesn't have a catchphrase. Tier 5 is reserved for things that the people who run this facility, people who have built careers around studying the worst nightmares evolution ever produced, people who eat lunch in the same building as caged demons and go home and sleep fine, refer to in official documentation, in formal language, with zero irony, as existential class threats. There are 2 Tier 5 entities at Pinnacle Station. I interviewed one of them. My supervisor was a man named Dr. Alan Whitfield, late 50s, former military, like me, but a different branch. He had the demeanor of a man who had been perpetually exhausted since approximately 1996 and had simply accepted fatigue as a personality trait. Whitfield ran the Behavioral Research Division, which was a polite way of saying he was in charge of talking to the monsters. He did not call them monsters, he called them entities. He corrected me every single time.
Interviews serve 2 purposes,
He told me on my first day.
intelligence and maintenance. Intelligence because some of these entities know things that are valuable to national security, scientific understanding, or the continued survival of the human species. Maintenance because, and I cannot stress this enough, some of these things need social interaction, or they become significantly more difficult to contain.
They need to talk.
Some of them, yes. Isolation is a tool, but it's a double-edged one. An entity that's been deprived of stimulus for too long can become erratic, desperate. A Tier 3 Fae in isolation for 6 months tried to phase through its containment wall. It couldn't. The wall is designed to prevent that. But the attempt caused a resonance cascade that killed power on 3 levels for 9 minutes.
He paused.
Have you ever been 600 feet underground in complete darkness, Dr. Martin?
No.
It is an experience I would not recommend. 2 staff members died in those 9 minutes. Not because the Fae killed them, because when the lights go out down here, the things behind the glass can see in the dark, and the people standing in front of the glass cannot.
He let that image sit in the air between us like smoke.
So, yes, they need to talk. They need stimulus. They need someone on the other side of the glass who can hold a conversation without screaming, crying, or catatonia. Which brings us to you.
Is that a real risk? Losing your mind? Whitfield looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a medical student who asks if blood is really that red.
Dr. Martin, I've had 6 researchers on this team in the past 4 years. 2 retired, early, with generous severance packages and NDAs that will outlive their grandchildren. 1 transferred to a facility in Alaska that I'm told is significantly less stressful, which tells you something about what less stressful than here looks like. 1 is in a psychiatric facility in Virginia. He is receiving excellent care. He does not know his own name.
Whitfield paused, adjusted the pen on his desk. A tiny, precise movement. The kind of movement a man makes when he's controlling something larger.
1 refuses to speak. She has not spoken since March of last year. Not to me, not to medical staff, not to her family. She can speak. Her vocal cords work. Her brain works. She has simply decided, or something has decided for her, that she's done talking. And 1 walked into the woods behind the facility on a Tuesday morning and was never found.
He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that I recognized from my years of interrogation work. The look of a man who is telling the truth and wishes he wasn't.
The job pays well. The job is important. The work matters, genuinely matters, in ways that most government work does not. But the job will also change you, Dr. Martin, in ways that I cannot predict and that you cannot prepare for. I've watched it change 6 people who were just as qualified as you, and each one of them broke differently. Some broke loud, some broke quiet. 1 broke so clean I didn't even notice until she was gone.
He stood up, walked to his door, opened it. The universal signal for, "This meeting is over."
I need you to understand all of that before we go any further. If you want to leave, I will personally drive you to the airport, and you'll never hear from us again. No judgment, no consequences. The offer is genuine.
I stood up. I thought about the psychiatric facility. I thought about the woman in the woods. I thought about the one who stopped talking. I understand, I said. Whitfield smiled. Small.
No, you don't. But you will.
He was right. About every single word of it. I spent my first 3 months on Tiers 1 and 2. The learning curve wasn't the monsters themselves. Sorry, entities. I've sat across from serial killers. I've interviewed men who did things to other human beings that I will take to my grave without repeating. I know what evil looks like when it's wearing a human face. The learning curve was realizing that everything I'd built my career on, every framework, every model, every assumption about consciousness and intelligence and what makes a mind, was a toy. A Fisher-Price understanding of reality. Cute, functional, completely inadequate for what was actually out there. Let me give you some examples, because I think you need to meet a few of these things before we go deeper. You need to understand the spectrum. You need to see the foothills before I show you the mountain. The Dryad was my first interview. Tier 1. Contained after she'd turned an entire national forest in Oregon hostile to human entry. And I don't mean unsafe. I mean hostile. Trees falling on hikers, not randomly, targeted, timed to hit. Trails rerouting themselves overnight so every path led deeper into the forest instead of out. Compasses spinning, GPS failing. Search and rescue teams going in after missing hikers and becoming missing themselves. Over a period of 3 years, 17 people entered that forest and didn't come back. The Forest Service blamed weather, terrain, animal predation. They were wrong. She sat across from me behind 3 inches of glass, and she was beautiful. I don't know what I expected. Bark skin, leaves for hair, something out of a fairy tale. She looked like a woman in her 40s. Lean, brown skin, dark eyes that had a strange depth to them, like looking into still water that's deeper than it appears. She was polite, soft-spoken. She had the patience of someone who had been alive for centuries and had long ago accepted that conversations with humans were going to be slow.
Dr. Martin,
She said,
you want to know why I killed those people?
I'd like to understand what happened, yes. She tilted her head, the way you'd tilt your head at a dog that just did something almost clever.
The forest is my body, not a metaphor. My body. Every root, every branch, every square inch of soil. Those hikers walked into me. They carved trails through me. They left garbage inside me. They started fires in me.
She folded her hands.
You wouldn't tolerate lice, Dr. Martin. Don't expect me to tolerate you.
I wrote that down. I remember my hand was steady, but something inside me had shifted, a small, tectonic thing. Because she wasn't crazy. She wasn't evil. She was a living organism defending her body from parasites, and from her perspective, she was right. We were the parasites. That's not a comfortable realization to have at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday while drinking government coffee. The vampire was next. Tier 1, technically, though I would have bumped him to Tier 2 just based on how unsettling he was to sit with. He'd been alive since the 1600s, spoke with a Tidewater Virginia accent so refined that he sounded like a colonial aristocrat, even when describing the taste of human blood, which he did with the enthusiasm of a sommelier discussing a particularly good vintage.
O negative is the standard, of course.
He told me once, completely unprompted, adjusting the cuffs of his uniform like it was a dinner jacket.
Reliable. Clean. The Toyota Camry of blood types. But AB positive. Now that is a Bordeaux. Complex, rich, exquisite mouthfeel.
Exquisite mouthfeel. He said exquisite mouthfeel about human blood while looking me in the eye with the pleasant smile of a man at a wine tasting. I wrote it down. I did not throw up. I consider this a professional achievement. He wasn't dangerous in the traditional sense. 4 centuries of existence had given him a discipline that younger vampires lacked. But he'd been imprisoned for turning a sitting US senator in 1987, which apparently caused a bureaucratic and constitutional crisis so severe that an entire department was created just to clean up the mess.
The senator was a willing participant.
He assured me, waving a hand dismissively.
He came to me. He wanted immortality. I simply provided a service. I'm a businessman, Dr. Martin. Supply and demand.
You turned a member of the United States Congress into a vampire.
I turned a mediocre member of Congress into a slightly less mediocre vampire. If anything, I improved the institution. He certainly started showing up to votes more regularly once he stopped needing sleep.
I almost laughed. Almost. And that was the thing about the Tier 1s. They could make you forget what they were. They were charming, articulate, funny. You'd find yourself 20 minutes into a conversation thinking, this person is fascinating. And then you'd remember that the fascinating person across from you had eaten someone in 1847 or collapsed a forest onto 17 hikers. And the whiplash between, I like talking to this person and this person is a monster would hit you like a truck. That whiplash never went away, not in 3 months. Then there was the shapeshifter, E-09, the one who'd impersonated the county clerk in Ohio. I expected something dramatic. What I got was a middle-aged man in a beige cardigan who looked like he sold insurance and was profoundly bored by the process.
I wasn't hurting anyone.
He said, in a voice so aggressively normal it circled back around to unsettling.
I filed permits. I processed applications. I showed up on time. I brought donuts on Fridays. Donuts, Dr. Martin. Every Friday. Glazed. Do you know how many government employees bring donuts? I was a model civil servant.
You're not human.
And? Is there a law that says you have to be human to file a building permit? Because I've read the Ohio Revised Code, Dr. Martin. All of it. Cover to cover. And nowhere does it specify species requirements for county employment.
You impersonated a real person.
I impersonated a person who had quit. Gerald Fink. Terrible clerk. Couldn't alphabetize to save his life. I found his abandoned desk, assumed his form, and did his job better than he ever did. The county's processing time improved by 40% during my tenure. 40%. They gave me a plaque. It's in a box somewhere in your evidence locker. I want it back.
He crossed his arms. The cardigan wrinkled in a way that was somehow defensive.
You people act like I committed some great crime. I processed 11,000 building permits in 11 years without a single error. Find me a human who can say the same. I'll wait.
I stared at him, and the thing that bothered me, the thing that kept me up that night, was that he had a point. He genuinely had a point. Whatever he was, he'd done the job. Better than a human. He'd shown up, followed the rules, brought donuts. The only law he'd broken was the one that said you have to be what you look like. And when I really sat with that, when I turned it over in my mind like a stone, I couldn't articulate why that was enough to lock someone in a cell 600 feet underground. I wrote in my report, E-09 poses no discernible threat to human safety. Recommend reclassification to monitored release. Whitfield denied it. He wrote one sentence in the margin. If we release the ones that don't seem dangerous, we legitimize the ones that are. I didn't agree, but I understood. E12, the Tooth Fairy. And no, I'm not going to call it that with a straight face, so let me explain what it actually was. Because the reality is significantly less whimsical than the legend. It was small, maybe 3 feet tall, vaguely humanoid, grey skin that had the texture of wet clay, oversized hands, each finger as long as my forearm, with too many joints, bending in directions that made my wrists ache just watching. It moved in quick, jerky motions, like a stop-motion animation, and its face, if you could call it a face, was mostly mouth. A wide, horizontal slit that stretched nearly ear to ear, filled with rows of tiny, mismatched teeth. Human teeth, children's teeth, hundreds of them, packed in layers like a shark's mouth if the shark raided a pediatric dentist's office. It didn't speak English. It didn't speak any identifiable language. It communicated in clicks and whistles that the linguistics team had partially decoded over a period of 8 years. We used a translator, a junior researcher named Kim, who had the dead eyes of someone who'd spent too much time learning to think like a thing that collects children's teeth. "Ask it why it takes the teeth," I said. Kim clicked and whistled. The entity responded. A long sequence. Kim's face did something I didn't like.
It says the teeth are seeds.
Seeds?
It says human children's teeth contain the beginning of a person, the potential. Everything the child could become is encoded in the first teeth. When the teeth fall out, the potential is released into the air and dissipates. It says that's a waste. It collects the teeth to preserve the potential.
Preserve it for what? More clicks. A longer response. Kim went pale.
It says it's planting a garden. It won't say where. It says the garden has been growing for a very long time. It says when the garden is ready, it will bloom. And what blooms will be...
Kim stopped translating. She shook her head. What? What blooms?
It doesn't have a word I can translate. The closest concept is better children. It says it's growing better children from the seeds.
I looked at the entity behind the glass. It looked back at me with the wide, wet, tooth-filled mouth, and I swear, it smiled. The way a gardener smiles when someone asks about their tomatoes. I did not sleep well that night, or the night after. I still don't like it when my niece loses a tooth. And I know that's irrational. I know it is. But rationality takes a back seat when you've seen the thing that inspired the myth, and you've looked into its mouth, and you've counted the rows. The last Tier 1 I want to tell you about was E15, a mirror entity, contained since 1974. It didn't have a body. It existed inside a mirror, an antique, full-length mirror with a mahogany frame that had been recovered from an estate sale in Connecticut after the previous owner was found standing in front of it, emaciated, having apparently not moved for 11 days. She was alive, technically. She never spoke again. The mirror was mounted on the wall of a containment cell. Standard protocol was to conduct interviews from the side, never standing directly in front of it, never looking at the reflection head-on. The staff called this the 45-degree rule. Nobody broke it. Not twice. I sat at an angle, as instructed, and looked at the mirror from the corner of my eye. The reflection showed the room, but wrong, slightly off. The dimensions didn't quite match. The corners were a degree too sharp. The lighting was a shade too cold. It was like looking into a photograph of the room rather than a reflection of it. And in the reflection, sitting where I was sitting, was me. But not me. A version of me that was watching me with an expression I'd never worn. Calm, patient, faintly amused, the way you'd watch an ant trying to climb a wall. "Good morning," I said to the mirror. "Morning," the reflection said back. My voice. My exact voice. But the timing was wrong. It responded a half-second before I finished speaking, as though it already knew what I was going to say. "Can you tell me what you are?" "Can you?" "I'm a psychologist." "That's what you do." I asked what you are. But I'll answer first, since you're going to be difficult about it. The reflection leaned back in its chair, a movement I hadn't made. I'm a window. Your kind invented mirrors to see yourselves, but mirrors don't show you what you look like. They show you what you look like reversed. Left becomes right. Right becomes left. You've never seen your own face, Joel. Not once in your life. Every reflection you've ever looked at is a lie. A flipped, reversed, inverted approximation of the thing you actually are. And you show the truth. I show what's behind the lie, not the reversed image, the original, the version of you that exists before the mirror flips it. And here's the part that tends to upset people. The original doesn't always look like what you expect. What does my original look like? The reflection smiled. My mouth, my teeth, but a smile I'd never smiled, wider, colder, knowing. You really want to know? That's why I'm here. Then look at me directly, not from the side, not at an angle. Turn your chair, face the mirror, and look. Every protocol said no. Every training module said no. The 45-degree rule existed for a reason. 6 researchers had followed the rules for 50 years, and the mirror had been successfully contained. I did not look. The reflection tilted its head, that same amused patience. Smart. But you'll wonder, tonight, tomorrow, for the rest of your life. Every time you pass a mirror, you'll think, what would I have seen? And that wondering, that tiny crack in your certainty about what you look like, what you are, that's enough. That's all I need. What do you mean, all you need? I feed on doubt, Dr. Martin. Not the big doubts. Those are loud, obvious, easy to spot. I feed on the small ones. The hairline fractures. The moment of hesitation when you look at your reflection and think, just for a second, is that really me? That second. That tiny, almost imperceptible second of uncertainty. Multiply that by every person who's ever looked in a mirror and wondered. Billions of people. Billions of seconds. I eat very well. It sat back, settled, comfortable. Thank you for coming, Joel. You've been delicious. I left the room. I walked to the bathroom. I stood in front of the sink and I looked at my reflection and, for 1 second, 1 terrible second, I didn't recognize myself. The face in the mirror was mine. The eyes were mine. But there was a gap. A tiny gap between what I expected to see and what I saw. Like looking at a word you've spelled 1,000 times and suddenly thinking, wait, is that right? It lasted 1 second. Then it passed. And I told myself it was nothing. Just a trick. Just the entity messing with my head. But every morning since, every single morning, when I look in the mirror, there's a half second before my brain accepts what it sees. A half second of loading time that wasn't there before. It feeds on that half second. And now that I've told you about it, now that you know, you're going to feel it too. Tomorrow morning, when you look in the mirror, that tiny hesitation, that micro doubt, you're welcome.